Hey everybody, it's Scott Shetler and welcome to this week's episode of Strength and Health TV. This week we're going to be talking a little bit about conditioning, cardiovascular training, and things of that nature. I actually had a request to do a video on this topic, so this we're going to talk a little bit about today. And I know I haven't really addressed this much in previous videos, so this will be something good to get into. I think the problem with conditioning is that it's kind of a generic term used to indicate some sort of cardiovascular fitness level or a cardiovascular readiness. I think the term gets kind of thrown around out there and nobody really has an idea what it means just because it is such a generalized term. You know, in the industry we talk about strength and conditioning coaches who are responsible for all physical development aspects of an athlete. So really they should be looked at as physical preparation coaches and not just strength and conditioning coaches. But again, with that being said, it is a bit of a generic term applied to some sort of what I feel is some sort of cardiovascular fitness level or cardiovascular readiness. The problem with conditioning is that it's all over the place, all right? If you look at various sports or different activities and things like that, every sport or even positions within a sport, they might have different levels of conditioning, requirements. For instance, if you look at a sport like football, the different positions like linemen aren't going to be running as far as the backs or the special teams and things like that. If you look at hockey, the goalie isn't going to be skating as much as the attackers are. So you have to really get specific when you're talking about the preparation of athletes, and you've got to look at the sport that they're participating in, the position within the sport, and then determine what all the physical requirements are for that athlete and that position within and their position within the sport, and then make adjustments to the training from there with regard to what their current level of preparation is. If you look at, say, a fighter compared to a powerlifter, all right, powerlifters need very little amounts of cardiovascular training or conditioning in their training. And if you look at a fighter, who's typically fighting, say, if we use mixed martial arts, for instance, 5-minute rounds, 3 5-minute rounds with 1 minute rest is the norm, unless you're talking about championship fights like in the UFC or something like that, where they might be going 5-minute rounds. So you have to take all that into consideration when you're looking at, am I conditioned enough for my sport? I don't think powerlifters need to go out and do a lot of running or anything like that. That doesn't mean that I don't think certain levels of cardiovascular training shouldn't be required for powerlifting, but I mean, we accomplish that by pushing the pace. For instance, with the powerlifters that I train, we just push the pace in training. After we do our primary movement for the day, all the accessory work is done back to back to back. On the days where we're training with for speed strength or strength speed, on the dynamic effort days, we push the pace pretty quick. We follow the recommendations that Louis Simmons sets forth with the training that they do at Westside Barbell, and we do very short rest intervals on the dynamic effort squat and bench days, where we're probably taking, give or take, about a minute in between sets. I've even found a lot of benefit to pushing the pace a little bit faster with some of the general athletes that I train as well. So when you look at, if we're training for about an hour or so, and we're just constantly moving in that hour, taking very, very little rest, we're getting quote-unquote conditioning. All right, and then if you look at some of the general physical preparation training that we do a lot of kettlebell swings, kettlebell cleans, snatches, things like that. We use kettlebells for GPP. We're out dragging and pushing sleds, doing all kinds of sled dragging, pressing and pulling with the upper body, doing various exercises, torso exercises, hip and hamstring exercises with it, just regular forward and backward walking with the sled. There's all kinds of stuff that we do that develops enough of a conditioning response for the powerlifters and strength athletes that I train. Now, let's talk about fighting, just because I mentioned it a minute ago, and I mean, that's such a hot topic in the strength and conditioning industry, the fitness industry, is how fighters train. I really think that based on the fighters that I've worked with in the past and the ones that I've talked to, a lot of them are over-conditioned to some level. When you look at the nature of their specific training, when they're training for their specific martial arts work, whether they're doing jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai or boxing or wrestling or a combination of all those as they have to do in the mixed martial arts, they're getting a lot of conditioning just from practicing and training in their sport. So when they're doing their specificity, they're doing a lot of conditioning as it is. if you're familiar with who I think is one of the best in the fight conditioning or the fight training world, is Joel Jamieson. Joel Jamieson from 8weeksout.com, I think, is his website. His book, Ultimate MMA Conditioning, is one of the best books I've ever read. I think it applies to so much more than just training of the mixed martial artist. I think you can really, he does such a good job of breaking down the various energy systems in the body and the correct prescriptions for training those energy systems to the highest level. I think it's a book that every trainer, every coach should have, just because it's just dense with information on energy systems training. And obviously he applies it to fighters there, but if you need to know how to train the athletes and the people that you work with, so you can take those recommendations and apply them to every athlete you work with. But it's a fantastic book, and something that I think should be on everybody's bookshelf if you're in the industry. But one of the areas that he points out that a lot of people lack in is what he refers to as cardiac development, where you do an actually very low intensity continuous movement training to develop a specific response. And the recommendations that he prescribes are somewhere in the ballpark of 130 to 150, I think, beats per minute during the training, and you're going to be doing between 30 and 90 minutes of some continuous activity to keep your heart rate in that range. So you're looking at a very specific heart rate range that you're going to be working in to elicit a certain response. And basically what you're doing is you're making your cardiovascular system more efficient when you do that. One of the kettlebell coaches that I worked with a while back, Valery Fedorenko, he would recommend very low intensity running. Now, he didn't talk about heart rate prescriptions, but I know somebody who went to one of Ivan Denisov's clinics. Denisov recommends something like 130 to 160 beats per minute for the lower intensity cardiovascular training. But basically the way Fedorenko described it to me was it's massage for your heart and lungs. And I always like that description, because really what you're doing is just flushing the vascular network by doing that lower intensity cardio training. So that's one type of cardiovascular training, or one type of conditioning for various athletes, or specific to for Fedorenko, it was specific to the kettlebell sport athlete. For the stuff that Joel Jamieson talks about, it's specific to the fighter or whatever the combat athletes that he's working with. So you have to, I guess what the main takeaway with all this is, when it comes to conditioning, when it comes to cardiovascular development, you've got to look at what are the requirements for you as an individual, as an athlete in the sport that you're competing in, or your position within that sport, because some positions, like I mentioned earlier, are all over the place. Some require higher levels of cardiovascular fitness, some don't, so you just have to look at what the requirement is of you as an individual, and then figure out what your current level is and how much work you need to put into that, just like you do with all other physical qualities. When you're looking at an athlete, you've got strength, you've got power, you've got speed, you've got your endurance, you've got flexibility, you've got mobility. There are so many factors that you have to consider on that wheel of preparation, if you want to refer to it as, and you've got to look at, how's my strength, how's my power, how's my endurance for the sport, and then based on what your current levels are. And that's how you can really fill in all the gaps on your training and preparation to ensure that you're at the highest possible level when it comes competition time. So conditioning is just one of the spokes in that wheel. Again, I do think conditioning is a little bit of a generic term, and it's not just, you don't get conditioned just from doing quote unquote cardio, all right? I don't think, like I mentioned for powerlifting, I don't think they need to do a ton of extra cardio. And I think that the more you start training in cardio or conditioning methods, the more potential it has to take away from your strength gains. So you've got to keep all that in mind. I don't think powerlifters need to be running on a treadmill multiple times a week or doing anything like that, because it's not sport specific. You have to look at, is what you're doing, whether it's specific preparation or general preparation, is it contributing to the overall goal, which in the case of an athlete is specificity. All right, I get so sick of the people that bash specificity, but that at the highest level, athletes are specialists. You have to specialize in what it is you're competing in, and everything you do needs to be about improving yourself as an athlete in your sport or whatever it is you're competing in. So you could make the argument that doing, from the general physical preparation standpoint, that sled dragging or something like that is beneficial for powerlifting, because as you're dragging a sled, it could be doing some extra work for your hamstrings, your glutes, your hips, which are very important muscle in powerlifting. You can do things to help for restoration for the upper body, various pressing and pulling as you're dragging the sled. So certainly that's not going to contribute to your maximal strength, like lifting heavy barbells in the squat, bench, and deadlift would, but does that help your training? Well, if you're sore, if you're having a hard time recovering from a training session and doing some light upper body sled dragging, like if you're wiped out from a bench session the day before, and you do some sled dragging, you do some pressing and rowing with the sled to help recovery and restoration in the muscle group that you just kind of wiped out the day before in training, then it's absolutely crucial to the performance of your sport. Is that going to be better than getting on a treadmill or a stationary bike and running or cycling for 30 minutes? Probably. I mean, for powerlifting, you just need to be able to make it through a meet day and still have some gas in the tank when it comes time to deadlift at the end of the competition. You don't need to have the same levels of endurance as a 5K or a 10K runner, let alone a marathoner or something like that. And we can flip that. Does a marathoner need the same strength levels as a powerlifter? No, but they do need certain amounts of strength, but nowhere near what a competitive powerlifter would need. So again, conditioning is very, very specific to the individual and to the athlete. I think something that people get a little bit confused on as well is they use cardiovascular health and cardiovascular fitness interchangeably, and the two things are completely different. Cardiovascular health just correlates to the health of your heart and the health of your vascular network. It's got nothing to do with, can I go out and run a good time in a 5K or a 10K or a marathon or something like that. That is cardiovascular fitness, all right? It's completely different. So just by going out and running doesn't mean that you're improving your health. I think the fastest way to improve it, if you're worried about cardiovascular health, don't get on the treadmill, eat better. I recently read the book How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger, and as a big advocate of a healthy vegan diet or a whole food plant-based diet myself, I believe that that's the best way that we can eat for optimal health. And in the book, Dr. Greger makes a comment that there's only one diet that has been shown to prevent and reverse cardiovascular disease, and that is the whole food plant-based diet. So why is that diet not the norm? I recently came across a study, I think it was presented by either Dr. Greger in one of his blogs or articles or videos, or maybe it was even Dr. Garth Davis, who shared this article, but it was basically, and I don't want to get the information wrong, but in a nutshell, this study looked at basically couch potatoes who follow a healthy whole food plant-based diet compared to omnivorous marathon runners or endurance athletes. And what they were looking at was cardiovascular health, and what they found was that the couch potatoes who ate a healthy whole food plant-based diet had better cardiovascular health than the endurance athletes who were following omnivorous diets. So what they were trying to show was the importance of nutrition when it comes to cardiovascular health. And obviously, somebody who can go out and run a marathon or is a great endurance athlete is going to have high levels of fitness. But again, fitness doesn't always equal health. So if your goal is cardiovascular health, change the way you eat. Stop eating crap. Eat things that are good for you. Don't think that you can eat a bunch of crappy foods and then just go out and train really hard and run and do all this cardio that is going to make you healthy, because it's not. I'm not saying exercise isn't important, but if your goal is cardiovascular health, change the way you eat first and then incorporate some sort of activity to help strengthen the body and improve your cardiovascular fitness. Now, let's look at, for instance, if we're going back to this whole health topic really quick. I know we got off on a tangent here, but I'm just trying to separate cardiovascular health and fitness. But if you look at I think it's the book, The Blue Zones, where they studied the populations throughout the world that regularly live to be over 100 years old, and they found little kind of pockets that they refer to as blue zones. One of the common things, aside from them following a predominantly whole food plant-based diet, was that they had regular daily activity. Now, the common thread wasn't super intense competitive sports or activities. These people weren't strength athletes. They weren't, ultra-marathon runners or anything like that. What they did is they had regular daily activity, meaning that they were moving around every day. They were very physically active, but it wasn't like a high stress physical activity. So, we hear all the time that high level competitive sports aren't exactly the best thing for health. I think that's true. I think the higher level you are in competition, the more wear and tear it puts on your body and the more it stresses your systems. So if health is your goal, and then doing lower intensity activities, I think would probably be better for the long term. Getting involved in some sort of practice like yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong meditation, doing some walking, some lower intensity cardio, doing lots of flexibility, mobility, and some very conservative strength training to just stimulate development in the various tissues in the body and things like that would probably be better than trying to compete at a high level in a strength sport like strongman or powerlifting or bodybuilding or being a marathon runner or something like that. Now, that's not to say that if you want to be competitive in one of those arenas, not to do it. Just keep in mind that your goal isn't health, your goal is performance, and performance and health don't always go hand in hand. So you do need to be able to separate those things and really identify what your goal is. So in a nutshell, that's my take on conditioning. I think oftentimes it's like I said earlier, it's a bit of a generic term, and I think it often gets lumped hand in hand with cardio. You often hear like fighters say, his cardio was good or his conditioning was good. And I think, again, they're kind of used interchangeably, cardio and conditioning. But really conditioning, in a nutshell, is just your level of physical preparation for what it is you participate in. And again, powerlifters have different conditioning than fighters. Fighters have different conditioning than marathon runners. Marathon runners have different conditioning than football players, and so on down the line. So if you want to find out the optimal levels of conditioning, you have to identify the specific physical requirements for the sport that you're competing in, compare that to what your levels of physical preparation are, and then fill in those gaps with the appropriate training modalities. And that doesn't always mean you need to go out and run. So hopefully that clears up some different ideas on conditioning, cardiovascular training, cardiovascular fitness, and health. And hopefully you found this video interesting. If you've got a specific topic that you want addressed in a future episode, just leave the suggestions down in the comments below. If you've got any comments or any feedback, be sure to leave those in the comments below. If you want to reach me directly, if you've got anything you want to ask or talk about, you can contact me through my email or the contact info that I provide in the notes underneath this video. And until next time, as always, stay strong and stay healthy.